Okay, video on distributive property. I've been grading some of the quizzes and we are definitely getting better at it, but I still see some people struggling, so I thought I'd post this video so people can go back and look if you're struggling. Alright, so first clue to know that you have the distributive property is you need to see parentheses. If you don't see any parentheses, you're not going to have to do the distributive property. You will also get questions on tests where it will ask you to recognize when you're using the distributive property, or maybe when somebody messed up, like error analysis, somebody messed up trying to use the distributive property. So parentheses is your first clue. That doesn't mean you're automatically going to have it, but if you see parentheses, you need to know when you have the distributive property. If you don't see any parentheses, then you can't have the distributive property, unless you're doing the kind of the inverse of the distributive property, but we'll cover that later. All right, so distributive property. So you have a number outside of parentheses, and then you have some kind of terms going on inside of parentheses. Trying to write a little bit bigger for this one. Hopefully I don't run out of space. So the big key on this, again, most people are getting this, but still a few struggling. When you see a number next to these parentheses, or a number next to anything, a variable, two variables next to each other, if there's no symbol in between, so there's just this number in these parentheses, if you see this or something similar to this, I'm going to go ahead and I hate confusing doing two things in a video, but like X, Y, for example. There's no symbol, no math symbol, no operations, math operation symbol in between those. This means X times Y. We don't use the X to represent multiplication anymore. We use a dot in algebra. So this is the same situation. If you don't see a math operation between this number and this set of parentheses, that means you're taking -2 times this entire polynomial, I guess, inside these parentheses. So we've talked already about like terms. I need to do a video still on like terms and just terms in general. But these are terms. So this is a term, this -3y. This 1 is a term. It's actually a constant, but constants are also terms. So I need to take this number, this -2, because I can't, normally you would do the math in here, figure out what the answer is, and then multiply it by -2. I can't combine these though. They're not like terms. Again, I'll do a video on that separately. But I can't combine a term that has a variable and then a term that doesn't have a variable, so a constant. All I can do is just leave it like this. But what I can do is I can use the distributive property. And I can say, okay, well, I can take this 2 and distribute it to both of the terms, or all of the terms, that are inside my parentheses. In this case, I just have 2 of them, but you could have more than 2 of them in there. And when I distribute them, what that means is I'm actually multiplying -2 times each term that's in there. So that's the first thing you need to remember. So I'm going to take this -2 and I'm going to multiply it times -3y. And I'm also going to take this -2 and I'm going to multiply it by the -1. And again, if there would have been more terms in here inside the parentheses, I'd keep doing that with every single term. So we're struggling a little bit with the positives and negatives when we multiply and getting the answer correct. I'm not going to go through a lesson on here about the rules, but basically the rules are if the signs are the same, so if you have 2 positive signs or 2 negative signs, when you multiply or divide, the answer is positive. If the signs are not the same, so a positive and a negative, when you multiply, the answer is negative. So that's the rule if you're taking notes. In this case, I would just say put it in your calculator though. Put in -2. Normally that means you hit the number 2 and then you hit a little button. So can I fit this in? I'm going to put it over here. This is kind of a separate thing. To put a negative number in on most calculators that we use, you hit the number 2, and then you hit this little button over here. Most calculators have this. Looks something like that. You don't use the subtraction sign. I don't think there's any calculators that we ever use that you'd ever use a subtraction sign to put a negative in. You hit the number and you put that in. Okay, so anyway, I'm getting off track. So I take -2, and this is all separate. Don't worry about that anymore. That was just to show you that was multiplication. Times, no, we are only using the coefficient when we do the multiplication, but don't forget about the variable, because we're multiplying -2 times -3y. The y is just going to stay there afterwards, because technically this is 3 times y. So we're doing -2 times -3 times y, but we just don't show the multiplication, just like we didn't show it over here. Then you're going to do plus. It is always plus if you do it using this process. Always an addition sign, because we're going to take the negative sign. Shoot, I had a +1 there. So again, it's always going to be plus here, even if that was -1, because we would just say -2 times, and then that would be plus +1. So in this case, plus +1. If it were a -1, if it was 3y subtract 1, we would change that into plus -1, and then we would have a -1 there, but don't let that confuse you. Just watch what I'm doing. There are other videos you can watch on that. So now, we're not solving this, by the way. Too many people are trying to solve for a variable just because they see a variable. All we're doing is we're rewriting this into another format, into another form. There's no equal sign, so we can't solve for y. So now I say in my calculator, 2 negative times 3 negative, and you'll see that comes out to be positive 6y plus 2 negative times just +1 comes out to be -2. And you can leave it in that form, that's fine. If you want to write 6y subtract 2, that would be the same math. Again, see the other videos that are in there about positive and negative integers, adding positive and negative integers. So that's the distributive property. We took the -2, we used multiplication because there's no sign there, and we multiplied -2 times both terms.